I have always been here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, geeks and nerds, and ambassadors everywhere, and welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing. And of course, I am your host, the Ambassador, and hope y'all are having a very pleasant Friday night. And I am back with you once again. Brand new review series. Going to be starting new series tonight, and going to be talking about one of my favorite franchises, Xmen. And if this is your first visit to the Ambassadorial Wing, I hope you enjoy your time here. Hope you enjoy the stream, enjoy the discussion. And as always, whether this is your first time or your 100th time, make sure you hit that like button, share this out with all your friends. But of course, if this is your first visit here and you're not a part of the Ambassadorial Wing and you enjoy the content I'm putting out on this channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications, and become a part of the AW. But as I mentioned, tonight we're going to be starting a brand new review series, and I have to admit, this is by far one of my all-time favorite film franchises, despite some of the weaker entries, which I will be addressing in due time. But tonight, we start at the beginning, X-Men 2000. And we're going to jump straight into the discussion, and I will probably be dropping the link for the stream in the chat, opening up the lines or anything for anybody that wants to join me this evening for this discussion. And to everybody that is in the chat or was in the chat, thank you all for being here tonight. Ace Mowick, I know you were here a little while ago. Price is Right Reviews, Just George. Guys, good to see you as always. Appreciate you stopping in and hope you all enjoy the stream. And I'm not going to stand on a bunch of ceremony here. I am going to go ahead and put the link in the chat for anyone that comes in tonight that wants to join the discussion, that has seen this movie and wants to talk about it with me. So give me just a minute to take care of that, and then I will get into the discussion proper. So just bear with me for just 1 second. All right. And send. And pin. And there we go. All right. That's taken care of now. So let's get right into the discussion. X-Men 2000. And to say that I love this franchise, just, of course, if you're a Marvel fan, X-Men is one of those parts of the Marvel universe that a lot of us had an appreciation for, that a lot of us absolutely love. I mean, I grew up reading X-Men comics. I watched the X-Men animated series from the 90s, and I also watched X-Men Evolution. And to say I am an X-Men fanatic is an understatement. I mean, I even at one point started writing my own unofficial guide to the X-Men universe. Of course, that was right around the time that Marvel started doing their own X-Men encyclopedias and Marvel universe encyclopedias. So they kind of beat me to the punch, but you know what? I'm not going to begrudge them at that point. But when the announcement came down that Marvel Studios and 20th Century Fox were going to be doing this first film and potentially more, to say I was excited was an understatement. And I had many discussions with my friends and everything, both at work and from those I still kept in contact with in from high school and so on. And all of us, especially those of us that were of the geeky persuasion that read comic books, particularly X-Men comic books, we were absolutely over the moon about the idea of them doing a live action X-Men film. And when they announced who the cast was going to be and who the director was going to be, in particular, in this case, Bryan Singer, and I want to say this right now. I am not addressing any allegations that were lobbed at Bryan Singer throughout his career. I am separating the art from the artist here. We are discussing the art, not what the artist potentially could have done outside of these films. So, and we have our first guest tonight. He is a regular here. You know him. You love him. He hasn't been here in a while, but he is always in the chat and always has some great insights. The one, the only, Price is Right Reviews.
Damn straight. It's good to be back.
How you doing?
Doing pretty good, my man. It's been like literally months that I've been back on YouTube because of a streamer was like so shot. But I'm like, yes, time back on.
So glad to have you back, man. So, you know the topic, you know what we're discussing tonight. So I've kind of given a few thoughts here. X-Men 2000.
So we're talking about the first film, right? Just the first film.
Very first film, yeah. This is going to be an ongoing series. I'm going to go through the entire series, both the first set of movies and then the reboot.
So. Yeah, now me personally, I'm not really familiar with the whole backstory between Bryan Singer, so I'm not going to go into that myself either. But I do agree with separating the art from the artist, so it should be interesting. But he did a good job, in my opinion, as far as the first two, and then he kind of. I don't know if he did the other ones, but yeah, he did the first two. He did pretty well with.
Well, here's how it went. He did the first two, and then 20th Century brought in Brett Ratner to wrap up the series. Because at the time, actually, Singer was working on Superman Returns, so he couldn't do X-Men 3. But then, because X-Men 3 and then X-Men Origins Wolverine did so poorly, they went on a brief hiatus, and then in 2011, they did a reboot with X-Men First Class that I think it was Matthew Vaughn who directed that. Directed that first film, and then of course Bryan Singer came back for Days of Future Past. And oh my freaking gosh! In a few weeks when I get to that movie, me and Mam Ambassador will be doing a review of that, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Now, if I'm around for that, I'm definitely down for that discussion. That's going to be
fun. Yeah, sure. So, and want to say a shout out to the chat, to a face, to a name I have not seen in a very long time, and glad he's back. Glad he's doing better. Mir, the gravitationally adept. Mir, good to see you, bump friend. Missed you.
What's happening?
Glad you're here. So, all right. And we got another guest on tonight. You also know him. You love him. He's a regular, just like Price here. He is a fellow ambassador. Just George.
Hey, how's
George,
it going,
man? Good to see you.
That's good to see you too.
What's up, George?
So, been a minute, my man.
Let's do this.
Yeah. So, anyway, George, we're just kind of getting into this and everything. So, I'm assuming you've seen X-Men 2000. You're familiar with it. So,
yeah.
What are your thoughts? Where does it stand for you in the whole X-Men film franchise?
I mean, well, I actually did a review on it back in March because I was reviewing certain Marvel movies leading up to Doctor Strange 2, and I figured because we heard Patrick Stewart in that Doctor Strange trailer, I was like, okay, I got to review at least one X-Men film, so I'm going to review the original. And, looking back at it, because I'm going to be honest, I saw Spider-Man 2002 before I saw X-Men, and another film franchise that was popular around the time, Harry Potter. And I kind of made a comparison with X-Men and Harry Potter, where through Harry's eyes, we were learning about the Wizarding World in Harry Potter. With X-Men, we were looking through Rogue and Logan's eyes, learning about the mutant world, about the X-Men. And I feel like the X-Men franchise, while with the first film, there might be some special effects that may not have aged all that well. I think the overall stakes and like the plots, I think, have aged better.
See,
well,
I was going to I was going to mention I was going to mention the entire prejudices of the society toward mutants during the time as well.
Yes,
that's like the perfect example of like the civil rights era. If you think about it, think, because people with superpowers, you really think normal people are going to be quote unquote okay with that? Yeah, some people might be a little prejudiced about it. That's how I see it.
But also, like, I look at just how great this cast is. Like, not just like obviously Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, but like Ian McKellen is Magneto. Like, we gotta remember he was also Gandalf in like Lord of the Rings. You have James Marsden,
a year later.
You
Literally
have like
a year
Halle
later.
Berry. Like, you got like a cast that is still. These guys are still performing and acting today. It's like these guys never dropped off the map. These actors,
not really.
So
I think as far as the cast, they were kind of in the new eras. But the only actor I would think is probably in his gold prime was Patrick Stewart, because he was Captain Picard before he became Professor X. So he was already in his prime as far as his acting career.
Oh yeah. Well, and here's the thing. And George, you brought up a very good point. Singer went after the cast that he wanted, and he got it. He absolutely positively got it. And here's the crazy thing: several years before any inkling of them doing live action comic book movies was even a thing, I was talking with my late uncle and everything. Well, he wasn't late then, but he is, unfortunately, now, because he grew up reading comic books, and he was kind of an amateur artist. And and I asked him, I was like, we were talking back and forth about who would be our dream cast for particular characters, and who was the person we both, obviously when we said Professor Xavier, he's like, the bald guy off of Star Trek. I was like, Jean-Luc Picard. He's like, yeah, Patrick Stewart. I was like, yep, I agree. 100% agree. Honestly, for me, I mean, this was a gold standard cast for this film. I mean, every single person was perfect for the role. You had Taylor Mane, who was a big, burly wrestler. He was a smaller league wrestler, but he was still a wrestler as Sabretooth. You had Rebecca Romijn Stamos at the time as Mystique. You had Ray Park, who was coming off of his success as Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace.
You also have Halle Berry.
Yeah, you had Halle Berry. This was kind of like her first big launching point for her film career. But her as Storm, as Aurora Monroe, round numbers. I mean, you had Famke Janssen as Jean Grey. I was kind of surprised at her, but at the same time, she fit the role very well. And everything, she was very intellectual. She was kind of a bombshell and everything, but it wasn't overdone. And of course, you had James Marsden, who was kind of the field commander of the X-Men, and he was perfect and everything. And of course, you had Hugh Jackman. Now, originally, an actor who was in, I think, the second Mission Impossible movie, Dougray Scott, was supposed to be Logan. But unfortunately, he got hurt, and they brought Jackman in. And, well, the proof speaks for itself. The proof speaks for itself. Jackman, he nailed it. Now, of course, she had Anna Paquin. She had done a few things in her career and everything, but this was kind of a new thing for her. And I think she was, Rogue.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, they deviated from the source material for Rogue a little bit. Her power set is similar, but they gave her something of a backstory. She came from kind of a middle-class family in the South, which was appropriate because Rogue was originally from the South. We just didn't know specifically where. Now, they kept the whole element of her being able to absorb energy and, in the instance of mutants, their abilities from them by physical contact. But they kept they didn't bring in the other part because, well, just at the time, they didn't really fit. Honestly, I think them making the focus, her and Logan, the focus of this film was the right move, as you mentioned, Price and George, because they were good entry-level characters. They were kind of the outsiders, even for mutants. They didn't realize how many mutants were actually out there in the world, especially Logan. And when you look at a character like Rogue, her abilities isolate her even more so from mutants than just being a mutant would. And go ahead, Price.
I was going to mention, like, I've always wondered throughout the comics, was she able to control her powers? Is that just a reactionary thing when she touches anybody? Because to me, that'd be really sad if you can't really control that. You know what I mean? That would really be sad.
Throughout the course of the comics, she did develop degrees of control, but she always wore gloves and she wore a uniform that pretty much covered her body and anything just from accidental contact.
Yeah, and that's the sad part.
Yeah. Well, in the comic books, she got her powers, the ability to fly, her super strength, her invulnerability from absorbing the powers of Captain Marvel or Miss Marvel and everything, Carol Danvers. And that's where all of that came from. And we get the backstory of that both in the comics and in the X-Men animated series, because there is a specific episode that does discuss Rogue's back history. But I like what they did. They kept powers the same. They made her young, which I didn't really have an issue with or anything, because it made her more relatable.
Yeah.
And it made her a good opposite to Logan, who was also very much a loner. And there's one scene in particular. We can talk about some of our favorite scenes in the film, but this is a very small scene. It's when she's run away, when she's lured away by Mystique, who disguises herself as Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. And she's sitting there on the train waiting for it to depart, and Logan comes in, and she looks over and she sees the mother cradling her son, and he leans in close to her, and the mother touches her forehead, the son's forehead. And she can't have that. She's raw. I don't want to say raw. She's deprived of that because of her powers. She can't have. She nearly killed the first boy she kisses. That was for like.
Yeah.
Well, if you remember the opening, it's not the scene, it's like the second, but it's her introductory scene.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it'll lead into the sanitarium and everything with Jean Grey and Robert Kelly. So, but guys, I don't want to run off the mouth here. Your thoughts on it doesn't necessarily have to be what I just brought up, but what are some of your thoughts on X-Men 2000?
Well, I like the film because I think I told you in the chat before about rogue characters or anti-hero kind of characters. That's one of the things I like about Logan's character. He starts out as some kind of rogue figure. He just goes off on his own thing. He does boxing rings for money. He does all kind of different things. He gets in a lot of bar fights because he doesn't really have a direction yet as far as what he wants to do. Because he's the guy who literally lost his memory for who he was in the past. He has his military dog test. He has no idea how he got those, and he's trying to find his way in his own world, so to speak. And now it's just interesting how he meets the X-Men, how they somehow or help him find that direction again. I've always been fascinated about rogue anti-hero kind of characters, But you're right about one thing. Like I said, Patrick Stewart was in my opinion was made to be, Professor X. Like I said, you can't really see anyone else but Patrick Stewart as Professor X. At least I can think at that time.
Well, and even now, I mean, yeah, we got James McAvoy as a young Professor Xavier in the reboot movies. And I think honestly, he was a very good casting. I think he was almost a near perfect casting because you wanted someone who had kind of that pedigree as an intellectual, but also a very, very empathetic, very sympathetic to other people. I mean, for those of you who may not know the back history on and the inspiration for the characters of Charles Xavier and for Magneto, aka Eric Lyncher, and Stan Lee has talked about this, as well as the other people that were in charge of or responsible for the creation of the characters. Xavier was a kind of a parallel for Martin Luther King Jr. and Magneto was a parallel for Malcolm X, essentially, because they were both, civil rights. They were both civil rights leaders back in the 60s, and whereas King was not as militant, he tried to get reform through peaceful protest. Malcolm X was a lot more militant.
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of the inspirations for those two characters, but they made them obviously different.
Mm-hmm. I got one thing to add on that. The one thing I noticed about that is like that's one thing I enjoy about the dynamic between Professor X, Magneto. It's kind of the Marvel cinematic version of Dumbledore and what's his name, Grindelwald. They weren't in love, obviously, but it was more about they were like basically good friends, but they had different approaches about how to bring equality to the mutants and the rest of humanity. Charles Xavier, like I said, he was like the king character. He was really peaceful minded. He was able to, I guess, negotiate how he can make a peace between humans and mutants. But Magneto, like you said, he was the militant. He just wanted to, I guess, find equality through superiority. He wanted, I guess, let humanity know that no, we're the superior ones. That if you want to have peace, don't. I guess you'd say don't mess with us, in that kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So,
George, what about you?
Obviously the dynamic between Professor X and Magneto, because apparently like Stewart and McKellen are friends in real life, so that obviously helps how they play off one another. The beginning scene where you see Magneto as a kid in that concentration camp demonstrating his powers. And like one thing, obviously, I think X-Men First Class improved on that by making it much more emotional. But it's like just that scene in X-Men, even if you never saw First Class, you get maybe like where Magneto's coming from, like because obviously he's lived a harsher life than someone like Charles, because like if you look at it, like World War II, like in a concentration camp, like your life's basically being ruined. Your family's like dying. And like being a mutant on top of all of that is definitely like something that's going to affect your mindset when it comes to freedom for you as a mutant as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and go ahead, Bryce.
I was going to mention it makes you really sympathize with Magneto's character, how his upbringing was like. If it wasn't for World War II, he might turn out differently. Because, like I said, the circumstances of World War II, concentration camps, and now in the future, just like the civil rights movement, and on top of that, it's going to really mold, Magneto's militant nature in terms of finding equality.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about a character like Magneto. Yes, he is an antagonist, but he is a seemingly sympathetic antagonist. And
you get why he's doing it. I'm saying you get why he's doing it, but it's still wrong anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and they changed a little bit of Magneto's backstory, but they didn't change it so drastically that it took you out of it. And I liked the way Singer set up that introduction for Magneto, because it makes everything very visceral. It makes it all very believable. And you see the tattoo of the serial number on his arm later on. And when he's talking to Charles and everything, particularly during the standoff at the train station after Magneto and his bunch of captured Rogue, he's like, "Kill me now, and they will put you in chains with a number burned into your forehead."
Yep.
Essentially, what Magneto is drawing upon his own life experience and what him and his family and the Jewish people in general had to deal with the Third Reich and their anti-Semitism.
Yeah, he's basically telling Charles Xavier that if you just kill me now, you'll begin to see mutants becoming the new Holocaust, where the U.S. government, because in the movie, for what I remember, is the U.S. government is trying to make a registry for all mutants, that you can't be in hiding anymore. You got to register yourself just because you're someone who's different.
Yeah, and that scene at the beginning of the film with Jean Grey testifying before the Senate or Congress, and you've got Robert Kelly, and I'll say this: the actor, I can't remember the name of the actor who played Robert Kelly, but he carried off that role very, very well.
Yeah, and he makes him really unlikable.
He does. He very much does. But Grace, when Kelly says to her, "Well, we license people to drive," and she's like, "Yeah, but not to live."
Yep.
And she's right. We do not license people to simply exist. And that's what Kelly is pushing for.
And that's what Magneto was emphasizing about burning a number to your forehead. You have that registry knowing that you're a mutant, that you're no longer have a private life in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, for me, that exchange is very unsettling, and you can even see that some of the other congressmen and senators are even against what Kelly is pushing for, particularly the one older gentleman and the black congressman standing right next to him. They're like, "What the hell is this guy talking about? Registering people just because they're different?" And now, and Kelly brings up all this different evidence and everything, but you know what? He's a fearmonger. He's saber rattling, and they work very hard. I think, and I think very effectively to make Kelly also an antagonist. So, and just real quick to the chat, Sleeping Collectibles, I think this is the first time I've seen you in my chat, so welcome. Glad you're here tonight, and I hope you enjoy the stream. And Daniel Martin, it has been a little bit. Glad to see you, and hope you enjoy the stream, buddy.
It's gonna be fun.
I'm hey. So, well, just a brief segue. The reason why I want to do this series is because honestly, I love the X-Men films, and
likewise.
I will be covering the weaker elements of the franchise and everything, but I won't be doing streams for those and everything. I'll be doing those more as uploads because I want to I don't want to spend as much time on them, but I do want to address them. But one part of the motivation was obviously Doctor Strange, kind of like with you, George. I won't lie, but
well, I also like because we've gotten so far with the MCU, we kind of forget where we came from before Iron Man and Incredible Hulk. And I'm not just talking about obviously Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. We forgot we had Blade, we had X-Men, and these helped pave the way before Spider-Man came.
Yep.
Yeah. Very much so. Well, this movie came out, I think, it came out a year before the first Spider-Man did and everything. The first one that Sam Raimi did, because that one came out in 2000. And, as I said before you fellas came in, a lot of us that were comic book fans now, obviously, we got Blade before this, and a lot of us liked Blade, though it wasn't a character we were terribly familiar with. But for us, X-Men was a benchmark. Now let me qualify. We had gotten some DC properties like the Batman franchise and the Superman franchise, but as far as Marvel went, we had never really gotten anything of this quality, of this caliber, in terms of storytelling and writing and direction, and of course special effects. Now, granted, looking back 20 years removed, well, a little over 20, a little more than 20 years removed from that first film, the effects haven't particularly aged that well. You can kind of see the screws and Wolverine's claws, but you know what? You let it slide because, well, you love the movies and you love the story that's being told. But what Bryan Singer and the rest of the crew was able to do was craft a story that was true to the roots of the franchise in the comics, but took it kind of in a different direction. I'm not just talking aesthetically, like with the design of the costumes and everything.
Yeah.
But made it more adult, but still made it accessible for a broad audience.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
That's one of the coolest things about that, like you're mentioning, is that he's trying to stick to the material of the comics, that he wanted to bring it to a more adult / I guess you say teenager environment, but he tried to make all the costumes and the roles as closest to comics as possible as well.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. even Marvel Comics said we should perhaps take a look at what they're doing in the movies and maybe take our comics in a different direction. And you did see a design change for not only the costuming or the uniforms for the characters, but also in some instances for the characters themselves. I remember very distinctly that Beast got a big redesign and everything. Now they explained it off as a further evolution in his mutation, which can make sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they didn't stray from what the character was all about. And real quick before I get to my next point, Stephen Murphy. Stephen, it's been a little bit. Glad you're here tonight, and I will bring up your comments here. Hang on. 20 years the franchise is over, and the longest running.
That's very true.
Yeah. And people probably will look back on this and see it differently living in post-MCU world, may view it differently, but at least these first two films work the same with Spider-Man. I would go a little bit further, but yeah, Steven, I will say that the first two films were definitely benchmarks in a lot of ways. And like I said, I will be talking about the reboot series at least part way through, and I will be discussing also the Wolverine, and I will be talking about Logan because I consider those within the X-Men universe, the X-Men cinema universe.
I do have one question though.
The Wolverine's underrated.
Do you guys think that the Fantastic Four ones was considered a benchmark? The first two original Fantastic Four movies.
Honestly, looking back,
I mean, the way they did it that way.
In a way, looking back in hindsight, the first two Fantastic Four movies, they missed the mark in a lot of ways, honestly.
True. Okay.
So I'm really, I will say this. I mean, granted, we have not heard or seen anything aside from the fact that Tom Watts, or I think that's his name, the director,
John
Watts. Okay. I know John Watts has stepped down, but I have confidence that they'll bring in somebody just as qualified as him to do this first Fantastic Four film. It's going to be a little bit before we get there, but I have more confidence now that they'll do the Fantastic Four right than what we got previously. So,
okay.
But yeah, I am until I'm proven wrong, I am hopeful. I'll also bring up your comment here. I would also say the same thing about early MCU. The older films, those films get, I've grown more of an appreciation for Phase 1 as the years have gone on. Captain America: The First Avenger is still my favorite.
Mine too. Actually, on that one,
it's among my favorites. Stephen,
the great
believe
film.
me, it is.
I've always seen the first Captain America. Has always been like the way they did the film, the screenplay, how they made the old fashioned I don't know, 50s kind of looking, but it kind of gave off Indiana Jones vibes to me. That's all I've always said, that it's gives you that adventure kind of film as a Captain America story.
Yeah, I agree. So, and I'll bring up your other comment here, Steven. Sorry about not having been here. Just finding the time these days and time zone difference and all. Steven, you have nothing to apologize for, bud. You catch these streams when you can. If you catch the replay, that's fine too. Just
always welcome.
Yeah, Steven, everybody here is welcome, regardless if you catch this live or you catch us on the replay. So, and I'll bring up your comment, Daniel, then we'll get back into it. People nowadays complain about the black leather uniforms, and they even reference that in a meta way in one of the movies. Yeah, it's actually this first movie. But we were just happy to get these characters taken seriously. Yeah.
True.
I mean, that now one thing I will say, and this is a nice segue. So thank you for bringing this up, Daniel. The humor in this film, it wasn't over the top. It wasn't like slapstick, but it was more dialogue based than anything, and that was something that I appreciate. It was more. I don't want to say it was like way over the top cerebral, but it was like it made you think. It made you just chuckle a little bit. like when Logan says, "You people really go out in public in these things," and Scott says to him, "Well, what would you expect? Yellow spandex?" And if you're a comic book reader, you get it. And even if you aren't, but you're familiar with the design pre Xmen 2000 of how the characters were dressed in the comics or how they looked,
the cartoons or something like that.
Yeah, and the cartoons too.
Yeah, the 90s cartoons.
It was yellow spandex.
Probably my favorite one is when they go to the Liberty Tower, and he flips off Cyclops with his claw. That was kind of the
after he takes out the metal detector, and you've always wondered, would Wolverine ever actually do that in the comics? I don't know if he ever actually did. I'd have to do some research.
Yeah,
but that was a nice little
jab.
Nice, not so much a jab, but it was a nice little joke and everything. It was something that the audience would get, and even us who are hardcore fans of the franchise would get to. Now, in terms of the rest of the cast, I mean, like we said, we got Famke Janssen, who I think before this, her other biggest role was Xenia Onatopp from GoldenEye. And like I said, she both had that. She had that very cerebral aesthetic and everything, which someone like Jean Grey should have. But she also had a little bit of that bombshell as well. That femme fatale as well. Yeah, that too. Yeah, that too. Yeah, totally. And I love the fact that they do hint at a potential love triangle between her and Scott and Logan. And I will say this, one of my other favorite lines in this movie is when Logan asks, "Well, what's your power?" And she's like, "No, these are my powers." And he's like, "Well, why don't you just tell me?" And he's like, "What, you afraid you'll like it?" And she's like, "I doubt it." And she does it anyway.
Well, you see, that's the side of Logan you really see. He just does not care. He'll try to, not to be graphic, but he'll do anything just to get in her pants. He has a weird Chad kind of persona trying to get to her. Like, but she's like, I'm not falling for your tricks, Logan.
Yeah, totally. So,
I like how it's not forced, like the love triangle. It's just being set up, but it's like banter right now. Like,
yeah, yeah.
Well, and the love triangle between the three of them has been a long-standing thing in the X-Men franchise. It's always been something that we always will they won't they will they won't they will they won't. Eventually they do. There's even a alternate universe timeline called the Age of Apocalypse, which was, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, was one of the big benchmark miniseries that they did in the X-Men comics. And in that particular timeline, Jean and Logan do end up together because Scott and his brother Alex are working for Mr. Sinister, essentially, who is one of Apocalypse's lieutenants, one of his chief lieutenants. So you kind of get that fulfillment in this alternate timeline. Now, to the best of my recollection, now it's a long time since I've read X-Men comics. I don't think Logan and Jean ever ended up together, but I do know for a fact, because I've done research, I've watched several videos on this. Scott did eventually, and not against his will, at least not initially, ended up hooking up with Emma Frost, aka the White Queen. So, which we'll get into when we come to First Class. But for this film, the sexual tension wasn't played up big time, and there were a few funny little scenes, in particular after she finally they convince him to let them examine him, and he gives that little joke. Well, I see it didn't take you long to get my shirt back off. And then she just shoots into the scanner.
Yep.
And again, that's clever, subtle writing, and it just it works. So
it fits his personality too.
It does, yeah. I mean, I have to say they stuck to the personality that has been depicted both in the comics and in the animated series and everything of Logan, of Wolverine. And his introduction in the movie was a good one and everything, because we meet him right at the same time that Rogue is going on her journey. Yeah. And their first interaction is, well, he's just kind of a curmudgeon and he doesn't give a rat's ass about her. He's just going to leave her out there in the cold. At least initially he is. But at the same time, he doesn't. So, Price, George.
I was going to mention that really shows that even though he seems like a loner, but you do see he does that heart. He does have that heart. Like, okay, you're not going to just leave a kid in the middle of the snow. He grows a heart very quickly, I would say.
Yeah. George, what about you? Go ahead.
Yeah, one of my favorite scenes with Logan is definitely the bus scene with him and Rogue, where he says, "You know what? Let's give the school another chance." And it's like the heart to heart.
Yeah,
and it's really where you see like Logan, like he cares about this character, and it also shows that like he's not just this like violent guy that likes to take out his claws and attack people. He does have a heart. And that's just always been one of my favorite scenes in the X-Men franchise in general, that bus scene.
And that's what I like about his character, how, like you said, he doesn't remember a thing anymore about who he used to be. So it kind of gives you, when you see him have a heart like that, it kind of shows where his past could have came from. It's like, okay, he's a hard ass. He's a very hardened kind of character on his own, rogue character, but he still has a compassion, or I guess you'd say, of, how should I put it? He has a thing for honor. He's trying to be an honorable person, try to be the best he can, and try to, be compassionate when he can be. I would say that.
No, yeah, and I think that's a very accurate explanation of who Logan is, because honestly, Logan is a very complex character. And we don't ever get to really know who he was or where he came from until like the mid to late 90s, when Marvel finally did that absolutely gorgeous comic miniseries called Origin. And it gives the entire back history of where Logan came from. Well, James Howlett, his birth name, where he came from, where the claws were from, what was his early life like, and the fact that we find out he had been around since like the mid to late 1800s.
Well, for what I remember, he was alive before the Revolution, so like during the 1700s, I think. I could be wrong though.
No, he grew up in Canada. But,
I knew that.
Yeah, but no, it was like the mid to late 1800s, so it was after the American Revolution. It was almost
because I'm watching the montage from the Origins movie or whatever. It just shows all the wars he was been, and kind of gave off that he was alive at least during that time, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll bring up Daniel's comment here real quick. You see why people gravitate to the Wolverine character, chip on his shoulder, but heart of gold, tragic character. Yeah.
Yep, that's true. I agree with that.
Well, here's the thing with Logan. His history is so complex and so at times convoluted, especially after we got his backstory, because he is literally like one of the 3 oldest living mutants on in the X-Men universe. The only 2 that are older than him are Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister.
True. Well, except for in some cases, same with Sabretooth, because Sabretooth, even though he doesn't have a healing ability, he was able to live that long as well. He basically grew up with them in a sense.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Now, some people did have a little bit of a gripe with the fact that the Sabretooth we got in this film wasn't the classic Sabretooth who had a grudge and who had a past with Logan. This was just more of a lone character and everything that was working with Magneto. But at the same time, you don't have enough time to build all of these relationships and all of these complex decades-long rivalries. So they use the name and they use a design that's similar to what we have seen in the comics in the past, but they just make him kind of a generic bad guy. And wasn't, I wasn't terribly upset with that fact because everybody else was right on the numbers. So, and do you want to say a shout to the chat, Jacob Ironside? Jacob, good evening to you as well. Good to see you, buddy. I know you're probably coming over from Orange Hat's neck of the woods. Appreciate you stopping by. So,
I thought as I was watching the origin story of Wolverine, kind of shows you the backstory between not just Logan but Sabretooth as well. It almost seems like they're trying to recreate the Charles and Magneto kind of dynamic, where they're two characters who have different mindsets and different directions they want to go. One with the evil route, and one with the same way a Charles would. But I said Wolverine's character, he kind of had a lot of tragic events that lost his memory, so he couldn't really go that route fully, at least not yet.
Well, and like I said, here's the thing. You have got so many backstories and so many decades worth of character development and story arcs and rivalries and everything across the board. It is impossible to cram all of that into a roughly a little over an hour and a half movie. Even it would be difficult to do it like in a 2.5 hour movie. I mean, you would have to literally dedicate an entire movie to each and every one of these characters to give them the full development and give them the full context that they would need. But what Bryan Singer was able to do was in three or four scenes set up Magneto, set up Rogue, and set up Wolverine, who are going to be the three primary figures in this story. And everybody else was given a good introduction, but we didn't really know them as a character. So, and want to say shout out to the chat to an old friend of the channel, MJ1 Media. It's good to see you, bud. And I will bring up your comment here, buddy. Hang on one second. The anticipation for the first X-Men movie was high. It was also one of the last great musical scores by the late Michael Kamen. Yes. The scene where Wolverine revives Rogue is the most memorable moving theme. I would have to wholeheartedly agree with you, MJ, and appreciate you stopping in. Great.
Yeah. Before we continue, just letting you know in about 14 minutes, I'm going to call someone else. So I'll probably leave here for a sec. So I'll be back in 30 minutes. So if you see me leave, you'll know why.
Okay, that's fine, Bryce. I appreciate you telling me. So, I also bring up Steven's comment here, and trying to juggle all these characters. That's why the cartoon works so well, because it was a series. It had the time. Yes, absolutely.
It had a foundation in that.
Yeah, that too. Well, but here's the thing. If you were someone like me, or like you, Price, or George, or anything, who grew up reading the comics or who watched the cartoons or whatever the case may be, you already had a good feel for who all these characters were. But for somebody that was coming from the outside in that just saw the trailer for this one was like, ooh, this looks cool. Let's go check it out. It gave you enough. It gave you enough to make you understand the world that you're about to go into, not to mention that very iconic voiceover at the beginning of the film and everything by Professor Xavier.
Yep.
Great piece of storytelling right there. So, Price, George, any thoughts on anything I just brought up, or any thoughts that you might have?
One of the things I kind of like with like Wolverine is like where you have like Charles and like Magneto's sides. Like for a while, you kind of feel like Wolverine's in the middle, and like there's like for a time you think Magneto wants Wolverine until we find out he eventually wants Rogue. So it's like Wolverine's like the middle guy in this like conflict, and then ultimately we see he picks a side, which is like Charles' side, when he finds out like what Magneto wants to do to Rogue, this character that he's grown to care for.
Well, when you think about it, when Logan comes into the fray, when it comes to X-Men or Charles versus Magneto, he doesn't really care about either side. He just wants the answers to his past. That's why he asked Charles to be able to kind of do his own investigation where he might have came from, and kind of quote unquote point him in the right direction, which leads into the second movie where we show Logan trying to figure out where his past came from. So he didn't. at the beginning of this film, he didn't really care about either side. He just wanted answers to his own path. You know, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by him being a rogue character. He didn't really care about anybody. He was just trying to figure out his own past.
Well, yeah, because Xavier says it very, very perfectly. How long has it been, Logan? 15 years, wandering from place to place with no idea of who you really are. Mm-hmm. Give me a chance to help you find the answers that you're looking for. And Xavier, being a man of his word, at the end of the film, he does give him a lead. Now, it's a slim lead, but it's a lead, at least, or anything.
I do have one question there, real quick. You know, because we all know how powerful Charles Xavier was. His specific powers about mind control and manipulation of the mind. Do you really think he could have healed that part of his mind? We can actually unlock his memories again. I've always wondered that, because since he's so immensely powerful with manipulating mind, do you think he could have healed Logan's memories in that kind of sense? I mean, what do you think?
Well, if you remember in the second movie, and we can get into this a little bit here, and I think because it does relate. Logan's like, I need you to read my mind again, and Xavier is like, sometimes the mind needs to discover things for itself. Now, as immensely powerful as Xavier is it theoretically possible that he could have healed Logan's mind and his memory? Possibly, sure. Yeah. But at the same time, I think Xavier is wanting him to figure out things for himself. He doesn't want to just give him all the easy answers.
No, that part I get. I'm just saying. I'm just saying, from his perspective, he could have, because even though he got shot in the head by that bullet, he didn't really just completely erase his memory. He just kind of, in my opinion, suppressed him in a very darkened way where you can't really unlock him on your own. So I'm thinking maybe Xavier could have re-healed those memories for him. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah. So, and I will bring up Steven's comment here real quick before we do move on. Xmen 3 definitely has its issues. That's putting it mildly, Steven, but yeah. But the one thing I will always give it is the casting of Kelsey Grammer as Beast. Perfectly cast. I just wish he had more to do.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yep.
I wholeheartedly, although I will say the other guy who played Hank McCoy, aka Beast, in the reboot films, he was pretty damn good too.
Yeah, really good.
So, but you know, with any good movie, with any movie, you have to have a good story.
True.
And I think this first mission, this first adventure, while it did introduce the characters, it also gave them a legitimate threat. And you get the impression that Cyclops and Storm and Jean have worked together for a while now. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, Nicholas Hoult. That was the name of the actor. Appreciate it, buddy. Yeah,
gotcha.
That's it. Yeah. He was also in another film that I really wish I'd gotten to watch. I may try and find it on the cheap somewhere. It was called Tolkien. It was a biopic on J.R.R. Tolkien during his time in the First World War. So, but that's beside the point. What we have in this movie is essentially a rather basic, but I think a very engaging comic book issue story, which may have taken maybe 2 or 3 issues to complete, but they were able to do it in an hour and 40 some odd minutes. And I like what Magneto's motivation is. It really fits within the universe and everything that Singer is trying to set up, and it would also fit in a series of comic book issues. I mean, if you look at some of the shots, they almost look like they look like a comic book panel, honestly. Yeah. And that's one thing I really appreciated about the work that Singer and the rest of the crew did to make this look realistic, like it would take place in our world, but at the same time, make it just a little bit comic bookish to where it would work. So,
well, my thing is, I just now got reminded of this, that in the first movie, the X-Men, Magneto doesn't really want to kill anybody because he does kidnap Rogue for the machine, right? Well, he doesn't realize this machine kills yet. Well, from his perspective, all Magneto wanted to do is turn all the people at that UN summit by the Liberty Tower. All he wanted to do is change them into mutants like him to make it like more equalized throughout the rest of the world. So gives the world leaders a new perspective. That's all he wanted to do, but he didn't realize his machine kills. So it gives you another idea how his motivation as far as Magneto, he didn't want to kill anybody in that sense. He just wanted to make everyone the same in a sense. So
yeah, so
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it is. George, any thoughts on that particular aspect of the film?
Yeah, with Magneto, like I find him be like one of those villains that we don't really talk enough about when it comes to superhero movie villains. Like we always talk about, like Thanos, Heath Ledger's Joker, some of the villains from the Raimi films. What about like Ian McKellen as Magneto, a villain that has clear motivations that you wouldn't really call evil, but like
misguided, in my opinion.
He's misguided. He's been through a lot, and it's twisted his thinking, his mindset.
It's his perspective too. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about Magneto. In all of his schemes, he didn't necessarily ever intend to harm anyone unless they gave him no alternative.
Yep.
He was aggressive. He was militant, but he was trying to convince people that Homo superior or mutants were the next stage in evolution, and they should have a place in the world and not be maligned or sidelined or
second class citizens like that.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And even looking at it from the perspective of him being a Holocaust survivor, he has that fear in the back of his mind that him and his brother and sister mutants might end up just exactly like the Jews did.
Exactly. Now you're catching. Yeah. Now you're catching on. Yeah. He just wanted to, like I said, level the playing field in a sense to make everyone the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, being a person who studies a lot of history, I could see that very, very clearly in everything. So I do want to bring up MJ1's comment here real quick. And MJ, this is actually something I'm going to be addressing in the video I'm actually doing on these two specific movies. Like I said, there are certain movies I'm just going to do. And in this particular instance, I want to address these movies together because they repeat the same error both times.
Gotcha. Yeah,
X-Men 3 and X-Men Dark Phoenix both have the same problem as to why they failed. They both skipped over the Phoenix Saga and went to the Dark Phoenix Saga. And they even truncate. They shortened the Dark Phoenix Saga. And you're right, they can't do that.
Yeah, that's the kind of subject you have to run me, because I'm really not familiar with that subject myself either. So that'd be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, so. But I think, I tried to look at this. I tried to look at all film objectively. And, as much as a X-Men and a Marvel fanboy as I am, and obviously I am, I have to ask myself, does this movie still hold up? And was it as good then as it is now? And I have to say with all sincerity, despite the aging of the special effects, at least the graphic effects, not so much maybe the practical ones. Yeah. I feel it does still hold up.
Yeah, timeless.
Well, I've said this about other films before. X-Men 2000 is a very good comic book movie. I would say is a excellent comic book movie. But I think it transcends, at least in some degrees, into simply just being a really great movie because it tackles the concepts of personal identity, of the outsider, and of, I will say, classism, maybe, or at least fictional bigotry, or, well, real life bigotry, in a very mature and a very thoughtful way, but also in a very entertaining way. And if you think about it, what was Stan Lee and the other creators' motivation for X-Men? Creating characters that could address real life issues. And at the time in the 1960s, what was the big issue? The civil rights movement.
Yep.
And so they took that motivation and they created a franchise that has lasted for what, 80 years or so now.
Yep. Yeah. Well, before I leave, I'll say one thing that you mentioned, how he was a Holocaust survivor. It just puts you in that perspective. Like, put yourself in Magneto's suit with his power, then watch your family die at the hands of the Nazis. You can imagine how it develop a lot of hatred for a lot of things as well too. But develop a lot of anger, and like just like we saw in Apocalypse, even though it was kind of in my opinion, okay movie, but it really shows you that perspective of a Holocaust survivor just want to just vent all his anger on the world, in a sense, when you think about it.
Yeah, very true. So, well, Bryce, if I'm still going, the link will still be there. So, by all means, come back on in and everything, and hopefully talk to you later. Thanks, bud. Appreciate it. So, George, I didn't really. I don't mean to kind of dominate the conversation. Your thoughts on X-Men 2000. So I'm gonna let you have the floor for a little bit and let you take the reins and everything. So your thoughts on X-Men 2000.
Like I said at the beginning of the video, this was I saw like Spider-Man and like Harry Potter before this film, though this film came out before that. So obviously the comparison will be made to like films that came out afterwards. But like I said, from like seeing the view of the mutant world from Rogue and Logan's perspective to learning about like Magneto's like reasoning, seeing like the politics around the whole mutant debate, which like maybe like when I watched it the first time, because I was like much younger, like, and like obviously as a kid you may not be into that, but like as you get older it's more intriguing. And then like learning about how the school works, seeing the other characters like Storm and Cyclops, and yeah, they don't have big roles in this movie, but the way that they were handled, because again the central characters are Rogue, Logan, Charles, and Magneto. And probably the one character that I think performance that was actually underrated, I think, was Rebecca Romijn as Mystique. I liked what she did as Mystique in these films. And I'm not bashing on Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, because I liked her in First Class and Days of Future Past, but I felt like what Rebecca Romijn did with Mystique I feel like worked so much better for me, at least.
Well, and you know, the interesting thing with a character like Mystique, obviously they did a massive character redesign on her character, and I will say this: if you've seen Rebecca Romijn or anything at that time in her career, she was an attractive woman. There's no two ways about it. And I did think they played up I think they did play up the sex appeal a little bit with the redesign for Mystique and everything. But also, they wanted to give her a bit of agency in that she feels like she doesn't have to conform to what the rest of society thinks she should look like. She's comfortable in her own skin. She's comfortable in her appearance. I will say she only has like, I think, one or two lines of dialogue, if that. And I think my favorite line of dialogue from her is when they're there in the chopper and they're taking Senator Kelly to Magneto's to his hideout. And she has her foot to his throat. And she says, "It's people like you that made me afraid as a child." And then she kicks him and knocks him out. And you can hear the disdain and the disgust in her voice. And I will agree with you, George. Her performance is a bit underrated, although I did enjoy Jennifer Lawrence in the reboot films, at least up until Apocalypse, because that was the last one I watched. Rebecca Romijn.
I never saw Dark Phoenix either.
I'm only watching it for my video. I have not watched it when it came out. I did not really have a vested interest in doing so, considering all the stories I'd heard about it. And I am quite literally going to just tough it out for the sake of my video because I want to be as well informed as I can. Now, I remember X-Men 3 relatively well, so I don't really have to rewatch it. But yeah, let me ask you, besides Mystique and everything, what's another character that really stood out to you in this film, of the side characters?
Probably James Marsden as Cyclops and like the banter between him and Logan.
Mm.
And like I know obviously younger audiences know James Marsden more so in his more recent role in the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, but like before that, he was a really good Cyclops that like I don't think gets talked enough about.
He portrayed a version of Cyclops that I think a lot of people really appreciated, because he was the straight-laced field commander. He was the second in command behind Xavier. Like I said, Xavier's more of the overall leader, but Cyclops was the field commander. He was the soldier. He was the boots on the ground. And there's a scene and everything. It's after Xavier gets incapacitated when he links into Cerebro, and it's after Mystique has sabotaged it. And you hear Scott talking to Xavier. He's saying, "You've taught me everything in my life that was worth knowing." And he's like, "I want you to know that should anything happen, I will take care of them for you." That's the level of respect and the level of admiration, and I would say even love, like a son would have for a father, that Scott has for Charles.
Absolutely.
And just in a few little scenes here and there, they're able to establish that relationship. Now, Grant, like I said, for those of us who know the comics, know the history, know the lore, know the relationships, we know how close Xavier and Charles and Scott are. But for a person outside of it, just those few little scenes build that relationship and give you the idea, yeah, this is a person who has helped form this other person's identity, given them a good stance on where they are as a person in the world, and not just normally, but also as a mutant. And that's saying a lot for somebody like Charles Xavier. For him to have an impact on so many people's lives, to the point where they're willing to risk their own life for an ideal. That is a powerful thing. And you also see that in Jean and Aurora Storm's demeanor around Charles as well. They believe in his ideals just as much as potentially Toad and Sabretooth and Mystique believe in Magneto's ideals. But where it's more of a lackey and a master relationship between Magneto and his bunch, it's more of a family dynamic with Xavier and the 3 Prime X-Men, and to a degree also the students.
So, absolutely. And I feel like because we've gotten so many comic book movies since X-Men, like not just like Marvel, but like DC as well, we've got so many films to talk about. It feels like this film gets lost in the conversation because so many others have either been on equal footing or like have obviously improved on stuff. But one scene that always touches upon me, it's one of the things that frustrates me with X-Men Origins Wolverine, is when like Rogue's asking Wolverine about the claws and like, does it hurt? And he says every time. It's like, this guy's in pain as well when he uses his powers, and we don't realize how much pain. And it kind of frustrates me with Origins when like when he first takes out the metal claws and it's like used as a joke, when it's like in the flashbacks in like the next X-Men movies, it shows how much pain he is when he first gets the claws.
Hmm.
But like also I consider that good buildup of their eventual relationship because he's starting to open up to this girl.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know the interesting thing with the relationship between Logan and not just Rogue, but Logan and the rest of the X-Men, he's very standoffish of all of them. He's even standoffish of Xavier because he keeps hearing this voice in his head, and he's like, "Okay, where the hell is this coming from?" And it freaks you out. And I think it would freak anybody out, mutant or otherwise. But as time goes on, he does warm up to them. I mean, he encourages Rogue to go back to Xavier's mansion, to the school, so that maybe she can find some semblance of a normal life with them. And I really, in terms of Logan, he does grow, he does evolve, he does change in this film. And he still has that hard edge, but he's allowed himself to soften a little bit around these people that he has come to trust, and who has saved his neck and he saved theirs. And those sorts of things really develop a relationship amongst people, and oftentimes in a positive way.
And also one of the things to understand with Hugh Jackman is that this was his Hollywood introduction. Like he was a theater actor before this. He was like an Australian actor. This was his big breakthrough. And I know like there were some people said like at the time of the casting, some people were uncertain because he came from a theater background. But since 2000, he has become one of the best comic book movie performances where like he was the only saving grace in a bad film like X-Men Origins Wolverine. But like since this film, he has just like stood out and has showed the doubters that he can do it.
Well, and you know, it speaks to Jackman's ability as an actor. For him to come in honestly really cold and take on a character that is so loved and so admired and so iconic within the comic book fandom. And I'm just speaking in general, whether it's DC or Marvel, either way. Wolverine is quite literally one of the most iconic characters ever created, and that's a long list.
Yes.
I mean, that is an incredibly long list, not to mention a character that has so much back history, so many rivalries, so many villains, so many allies. He is honestly I think honestly one of the more well-rounded and most recognizable comic book characters ever to be created.
And also like the story arcs.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'll give you an example, and this is honestly one of my all-time favorite story arcs, and it comes from I think like the mid '90s, and it's in the aftermath of a crossover event called Fatal Attractions, where Magneto attacks the Earth, and he really goes all out this time, and Xavier and a team infiltrate his headquarters, which is in orbit above the Earth, and essentially Xavier lobotomizes Magneto, at least for a while, but eventually it does wear off. But because Logan attacks Magneto, Magneto quite literally rips the adamantium out of Logan's body through his pores. And in the aftermath of that, Logan realizes that the claws have always been there. And he goes off away from the team for a while, and he goes on a series of adventures and everything. But that period in his character's development is so amazing. because how he ends up getting his adamantium skeleton back is through quite literally an unwitting deal with the devil. In this particular instance, the devil is Apocalypse. Apocalypse gives him back his adamantium skeleton and makes him the Horseman of Death. And that, for me, is one of the most intense and absolutely amazing character arcs I have read in a very long time. No hyperbole whatsoever. Because Logan went from quite literally the very lowest that a person could potentially be to being right back where he was. Jacob, I think. Let me answer his question, then George, I'll let you go. Jacob, it is in the second to last issue of the crossover called Fatal Attractions. It was I think 6 or 7 issue crossover. If you look up Xmen Fatal Attractions, you could probably find the trade paperback of it. Hang on. Let me do one thing. George, I'm going to let you have the floor while I look something up real quick. So go ahead, bud.
All right. But yeah, like characters like Wolverine that have like these tragic backstories. To me, the comic book characters that stand out the most are the ones that have these stories of tragedy. And like, I don't want to sound like going dark all the time is always good, but characters like Wolverine, Batman, Spider-Man that just have these like all these things like happen to them. Like Wolverine's also up there with them. And again, like people will look and say, well, he's always surrounded by the X-Men. But like if you look at some of the films that he's been in where he's not with the X-Men, like the Wolverine, Logan, like the stories hit deeper than you realize.
Yeah, totally. Hang on just a minute, Michael, because I did find that image. Just bear with me for a minute. Okay. I think that's about as big as I'm going to be able to make it. Maybe. We'll find out here in a second. Oh, okay. Oh, this is from the Marvel database, even better. Okay, no, it's not going to give me a bigger image. Damn it.
But also, I will say, is Hugh Jackman when he quips as Logan as well, like it also comes across as very funny, like the sense of humor, whether it's intentional or unintentional. That it's just executed so perfectly when he like delivers a one-liner that may not even be meant to be intentionally funny.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's very true because Bryan Singer knows how to write his characters funny without it becoming overly comedic or cringy, and that's one of the reasons why I like his work and everything. I mean, the movie he did before this film was one of my all-time favorite crime caper films, and that is, of course, Usual Suspects. And if you look at both Usual Suspects and the X-Men films, what are they first and foremost? They're an ensemble cast. And Singer is able to work very well with an ensemble cast. Okay, Jacob, hopefully you can see this image. This is where... Okay, go away. I blast it all. All right, hang on. Sorry. Didn't think it would do that. All right, 1 second, guys. All right. I'll have to go all the way back through. Damn it. Okay, this is from it's from the event 1993, the 1993 crossover event Fatal Attractions. All right, you can go away. Come on, come up here. I don't care about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I really, really don't. I care. There we go. Okay. This is because just before this, Logan attacks Magneto and claws him. Now it's a minor injury, but it's enough to annoy Magneto, and in the heat of the moment, he does this. You can see the absolute brutality of what Magneto does to Logan. Well, at least you're supposed to be seeing it, and you're not. Hang on. Contrary butthead. Okay, there we go. All right, there we go. Let's see. Wolverine and Batman have such tragic histories. It's easy to see how they can be used in many time periods in history. Yeah, Daniel, that is true. Jacob, I will tell you from personal experience, I actually had the trade paperback for this miniseries because it was one of my all-time favorites. And but if you want to see a truly epic story play out that has some long-lasting stakes for the MCU going forward, if you can find it, I would get Fatal Attractions because it is either as a trade paperback or if you want to collect the individual issues, whatever way works for you best. But this right here was a pivotal moment in the history of Wolverine. Him getting his adamantium skeleton ripped out of his body by Magneto, and it nearly kills him. They're rushing from Magneto's base back to the mansion, to Xavier's mansion in the Blackbird. And he's hanging on the edge of death because his healing factor is so overwhelmed. Let's see. This panel is the reverse of what Magneto did to Wolverine in Days of Future Past. I don't remember Magneto doing this to Wolverine in Days of Future Past. Oh, are you talking about the movie, maybe, Daniel? If you are, I think you're right.
Yeah, he did because he does something in the film Days of Future Past with him where he's putting like all this metal in him.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, I'm definitely going to rewatch Days of Future Past. Okay, Dana, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah. So, but honestly, I think for all of us who have been comic book fans for a very long time. No, that's okay, Daniel. No worries. Jacob, you're very welcome. I have to admit, the interactions between all the characters seem very organic. It didn't seem forced. It didn't seem out of place. Everybody, to one degree or another, got along, especially at least on the hero side of things. But again, as you've mentioned, George, and Price mentioned it too before he had to bounce, Magneto was a empathetic antagonist. We didn't necessarily agree with his methods, but we understood his motivations for why he was doing what he was doing. And I think it speaks very highly of Ian McKellen and his ability in this role and just as an actor in general to pull that off.
Absolutely. And obviously he's a legend for us nerds in the early 2000s because obviously he was also Gandalf in Lord of the Rings and he played that role perfectly. So you look at Ian McKellen, he can be the good guy perfectly in one film and then in the next film he can be the bad guy perfectly. And just when he talks, it's so engaging. And it's you can't help but be intrigued by this guy even though he's the villain.
Well, and the other thing about McKellen is he brings his thespian skills, his stage skills to this part. And it's you see it very clearly in that first exchange between him and Charles after they leave the gallery of the hearing, and he keeps himself bladed and his back turned to Charles until towards the end of their conversation, and then he turns to face Charles. And it's a very dramatic reveal. You expect something. It's almost as if Singer was trying to play with us a little bit in terms of what we were expecting Magneto to look like. But he looked so much like the classic adaptation or the classic appearance of Magneto that we were like, you sold us. And that line that he says to Charles as he's walking away, we are the future, not them. They no longer matter. Perfect line delivered perfectly.
And it's funny how like Ian McKellen and like Hugh Jackman, they came from like stage performing backgrounds themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So like you got two of them like in like the main three like leads. And like I remember like back in high school, like because we were like doing like William Shakespeare, we were learning Macbeth. Like I didn't know Ian McKellen once played Macbeth in like a televised play. And obviously I saw this like after like I watched X-Men. I'm like, man, this guy does anything perfectly at any time and day. Like this was back in 1979, this play. So like McKellen just like always brings it any day and age.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, Fassbender was amazing as Magneto in the newer X-Men movies as well. But there's just something about Ian McKellen, just how he delivers lines, like his like chemistry with Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman, that just like, to me, he's a top 5 comic book movie villain of all time.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's the strength of the script that McKellen was given and his ability to bring that character to life. Because up until now, the only interaction we had with Magneto either was in comic books or in animation. Now, don't get me wrong. What they did with Magneto in animation was well in keeping with the character that we had seen previously. But I will also say this. McKellen's ability to turn on a dime and play a hero 1 minute and a villain the next. And it's amazing to see. A person of his age with his versatility able to pull off playing a heroic figure like Gandalf the Grey or Gandalf the White, and then in the same, almost practically in the same breath, he's able to pull off one of comic books' most iconic, absolutely iconic villains. And again, he nails it.
And that's why like I have like fears when it comes to casting the new X-Men in the MCU, because it's like obviously Stewart and McKellen have done fantastic, and McAvoy and Fassbender pulled it off, and now it's like those are big shoes to fill.
Yes.
And like it takes rare talent to fill in those shoes in what is obviously going to be crucial in the MCU going forward, because we still have no idea when the X-Men are going to appear in the MCU and all that.
No. Even though we get at least one in Doctor Strange. And no, for those of you wondering, hey, Ambassador, where's your review of X-Men or of Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness? Me and Mam Ambassador are actually going to see it tomorrow, and we will be bringing you all our review Sunday afternoon and everything. Because, well, here's just a brief little segue. 7 years ago, me and Mam Ambassador got married. And at the time, what was the big MCU film then? Avengers Age of Ultron. And here we are 7 years later. We have gone through 3 phases of the MCU. and we're in phase 4, and we're celebrating our anniversary with another MCU film, and I think hopefully from everything I've heard, a truly outstanding one. So
yeah, I loved it. I had a great time with it.
That's what I've heard from everybody. I mean,
Just like,
only. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Just don't like expect it to be like No Way Home, where like there's like a ton of like cameos or whatever. They're gonna be as important. I feel like people like listen to like fake scoops or whatever about like what variants are gonna be in it, and it's like just focus on the film itself. It's still a Doctor Strange movie where Doctor Strange, Wanda, and American Chavez are the main 3 central characters.
Yeah. I mean, do I expect a few cameos? Yeah, I do. I mean, obviously, we know Professor Xavier's in this as a member of the Illuminati. And we have an inkling that Captain Carter is going to be in this as well. Again. So, but yeah, I want to bring up Steven's comment here real quick. Cyclops, Storm, fry him, Magneto, or fry him. Oh, yes. A bolt of lightning into a huge copper conductor. I thought you lived at a school. So, yeah, and I will say this. So, and I'll bring up your other comment here, Stephen. Hard to balance humor and menace and make it feel natural, not undermining anything. Yeah, great, Stephen. Great point. I mean, if you think about a lot of Magneto's dialogue, it's unintentionally but very darkly humorous, and yet he makes it, and McKellen makes it work.
Yeah, like I think we gotta thank the first X-Men film because it was a big film like at the time, because it was not just like one hero, it was like many heroes. Like before the Avengers were formed, the Fantastic Four. And like again, you have like the final battle on the Statue of Liberty in X-Men. Guess what? Like 21 years later, we had a final fight in No Way Home. So it's like this film was essentially like a blueprint for like a lot of stuff that was to come.
True.
And maybe it was intentionally or unintentionally some of the stuff that would later happen in Marvel films, but still, like X-Men was really like the blueprint, I feel like, before like Spider-Man came out, before Iron Man came out.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, and Daniel, I just want to say thank you, appreciate it, and yeah, we've been talking about it today, the last couple of days when we were going to do our review of it and everything, because we really enjoyed doing that review of Death on the Nile back a few weeks ago and everything, and we're also going to be doing a couples review of also Days of Future Past, because that was actually the first film me and Mam Ambassador saw together when we started dating back 8 years ago. And we will also be doing a couples review, and possibly I might open up the lines and everything, and we'll be doing a review of Thor: Love and Thunder and everything in July, because that's definitely one we both want to see. So
yeah, I like the trailer for that one.
Ooh, yeah, really,
and also Christian Bale playing Gore the God Butcher. I'm like, that to me is what is the hook for this film.
Seeing how he does that, and I'm gonna have to do some research and everything, and I know exactly where to go for all my research. Comics Explained. Robert Jefferson, that guy knows his stuff. And I do like this comment here. Your comment here, Stephen. Then contrast when Magneto and Rogue are viewing the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, she's like, I've seen it, and he's like, first time I saw it was 1949. America was going to be the land of tolerance, peace. But there is no tolerance and there is no peace.
The symbolism is just like Bryan Singer knew what he was doing with this film. And like people say he doesn't understand X-Men. It's like, to me, he understands X-Men the same way Sam Raimi understands Spider-Man, where like it's not like comic to film like 100%, but it's heavily inspired. And even if it's not like costume accurate, it's still pulled off very well.
here's the thing. He could have gone comic book accurate, and honestly, I don't think this movie would have landed as well as it did. I really, truly don't. I don't think if they had gone completely comic book accurate and then trying to appease the fans, the more hardcore fans. Granted, I'm a hardcore fan, but I was okay with the changes that were made because I understood that what was done in the comics would not translate to live action. Now, would it translate from comic to animation? Sure. But would it translate from comic to live action? No. And anybody who says that it would doesn't understand how to put together a shot, doesn't understand how to make these characters seem believable and realistic and not have them come off as campy and cheesy and just absolutely cringy. They need to feel like human beings, not just images of lead and ink and everything and paint put on a page or put on an animation cell. You're having to bring these characters from a 2 or potentially even a 3D medium into live action.
Yeah, like the character Mystique, like she can be very quirky and snarky and like tease the heroes, but like she's also like a force, and that's why I like this character in these original X-Men films. She's a perfect second in command to Magneto.
Well, and the other really interesting thing in terms of this film is how the world is designed. Now, you take a look at the exteriors of Xavier's mansion, and it's a pretty close fit for every image that we have seen of Xavier's mansion in the comic and even in the different animated series. It fits. And even when they go into the lower part of the mansion where the X-Men's facilities are at, it works. It's not overdone, it's not overblown, it just simply works.
I love the design of the mansion, I always cringe when someone says, "That reminds me of Wayne Manor." I'm like, "No, this is not Wayne Manor."
No, it is
like
not.
This is Charles School, and it looks perfect. And I feel like that's something they've gotten right from the beginning, and that they've continued to do well in all the other films, whether it's the original films or even what you would call like the prequel alternate timeline series with McAvoy and Fassbender. But also like the designs of like Cerebro, like all like their technology, even for 2000, it was like they did such work on it.
It looked damn good. And yeah, you look at all the animated or the comic book images of Cerebro. What Singer was able to do was take it and bend it to a more current aesthetic design wise, but still keep the basic idea of what this is, what this piece of equipment is, and what it does. And they pulled it off, and I applaud them for it, because from the training room to the Cerebro chamber and so on, it just works.
And also, this film is less than 2 hours. It's only an hour and 44 minutes, and they cover a lot. They have a lot of characters. Like nowadays, if you were to tell someone who never saw this film that, hey, there's an X-Men film that's like an hour and 44 minutes, they wouldn't believe you, because the runtime for comic book movies is now like 2 hours or more. But then you have to say, no, this is actually a really good film. It's the first X-Men film ever made. Go check it out. And I feel like they cover a lot. And yeah, maybe like they could have added like maybe like at least 5 more minutes to give us more development on like Scott or Storm or whatever. But those characters are still played off so well where you can forgive them for not giving them as much more development, even though you want to see it. And I feel like X-Men 2 United makes up for some of that development.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you get more time with and you get more time with Jean and with Aurora and with Scott. But here's the interesting thing too. You get them paired off with the other person, where you would think that Scott and Jean would be paired together, and maybe Storm and Wolverine would be paired together. Instead, Xavier's like, no, ladies, you go out there and you figure out what the hell's going on. And it worked because these two felt very complementary to each other. They balanced each other out very nicely. And it was just a pleasure to see a group of actors come together to portray such an iconic team within comic book lore, and particularly within the Marvel universe. And that's why I am so happy to be here tonight discussing this film, why I love it, why we love it as comic book fans, but also just in general as fans of good cinema. As I said before, when a film becomes so well regarded, it transcends any of the concerns that we as the fan base might have had.
And also, like, it gave a revitalization for comic book movies because, yeah, in '98 we had Blade, but it wasn't as well known. You got to remember, it wasn't just Marvel. DC, like, you're coming off Batman and Robin from '97.
Yeah.
So, like, comic book movies were not really still in a good place at the time, other than maybe some, like, R-rated stuff like Blade, maybe guilty pleasure stuff like Spawn. But, like, X-Men really paved the way, and again, not just for Marvel, but I think also like just in general, because you had not just like one hero, you had several heroes and stakes that we haven't seen so big since maybe like the first two Richard Donner Superman movies, where there were some higher stakes in those films. But like we were back, but now you have the X-Men, where like you gotta stop Magneto from turning all these people into mutants, and you have these issues of discrimination, politics being put into place, and the stakes just feel high again.
What I missed that I've been gone. Done what I missed so far.
Quite a bit. I mean, we were talking about McKellen's performance as Magneto. We were talking about
yeah, because I've been doing some car hunting, but while I was gone, just car hunting.
Well, Price, you're fine, bud. I understand. You got a life outside of this. I do too. So does George. So no worries.
But building on what George was saying about Magneto trying to turn all the politicians into mutants, he had the motivation to try and make everyone equal, or make them see from his perspective the mutant, like, you know, about discrimination and civil rights and stuff like that. Like I said, he was more militant, willing to, I guess, level the playing field of sort. Yeah. So.
Well, and you know, and guys, if I start to lose my train of thought a little bit, I am sorry. I've been up since 3 a.m. this morning. So,
you have a life outside of this.
Get me, if I stray too far, get me back on track. But I will do my best, I think, to keep this thing running smoothly. So, we'll probably go for a little bit longer, and then we're probably going to wrap up and everything, because I don't want to belabor the point, and I want to have a good discussion, have a fun discussion and everything, but I don't want to, you know, just start rehashing the same things we've already discussed.
Of course.
So. Yes, Daniel, outside of YouTube, we all have lives, especially me. So, but well, Price, let me ask you this: Do you think McKellen's performance as Magneto really helped to push this film to be as successful as it was? And George, same question to you.
From my perspective, it really made feel. In my perspective, watching Ian McKellen's performance as Magneto, he made the character, like I said, feel relatable. He brought it to life to where, okay, he's an evil. Not evil. I guess he's a bad guy with I guess you would say good moral intentions, but went out in a different evil kind of way. So Ian McKellen's performance kind of made it feel real, made the character feel more relatable and real. So I thought it added well to the franchise of the X-Men. So.
Yeah, totally. Well, and here's the other thing too. I mean, me and George were talking about the rest of the cast or anything like Rebecca Romaine as Mystique. We were talking about James Marsden as Cyclops and so on.
I forgot about her, by the way. She was awesome.
Yeah. Let me ask you, of all the characters in this film, and you can't say Magneto, who is kind of your standout performance, your standout actor or actress in this film?
Well, judging by the previous conversation before I left, you're sure I know about the answer by now. Is Professor X's character, how he develops throughout the film, because he was always a narrator, but you also kind of see his perspective on how he solves the crime, not crime, but he helps solve the issue between discrimination and I guess you say the civil rights version of the X-Men. He tries to be the Martin Luther King kind of character. He tries to be the one who tries to see peace from both sides or all sides.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. He's trying to bring people together who share his perspective, even though most people, unless they're very extreme themselves, would even consider agreeing with his plan to create reform, create a world where mutants are the dominant species, or at least where mutants are left alone.
Yep.
And that's not a simple thing for one guy to do.
Well, here's the one thing I noticed about the whole dynamic of prejudices and social interaction between humans and mutants. It was always that that civil rights era kind of persona. Well, the way I see it is, imagine you being just a normal human with no powers at all. Then you come in contact with somebody who has very powerful abilities that could be considered dangerous. Because, like I said, Magneto can control metal of all things. He can literally destroy entire cities if he wanted to, or someone like Pyro, for example, he can create fire from his from his hands and all that. So, from the perspective of humans who didn't have powers at all, in a way, you can do kind of sympathize to all, but that kind of seems scary because any one of them can go haywire and do God knows what else. They could do the whole city or the people, So the prejudice was, in my personal opinion, was understandable to a point. When it gets to the point where X-Men 2, where his own family turns on him and turns him into the police when the police show up at their house, it kind of showed you the tyrannical control that the government will have just based on fear of someone who's different. That's the way I put that.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you. What essentially the X-Men films boil down to is people being afraid and people lashing out of what is
unnecessarily
different and difficult and just.
Because I think there was a line in X-Men 3 where the president of the United States, he says, how can I be a commander in chief that protects the country when one man can move a city with his mind? Kind of makes you that perspective of the human side. Like, we want to be safe. We want to treat you just the same as we are, but at the same time, there are also those who will use their powers who do very catastrophic things to cities and people. How can humans balance that?
Yeah, totally. Well, and
what about you, George?
Oh, hey guys.
Yeah, you're okay, bud.
Hey, what do you think?
Oh, what was the question? Because I just got back.
About Ian McKellen's performance and how he plays into the success of the X-Men first two films.
With like Ian McKellen, it's like you got like a sense of somebody that like has been through, like we previously said, a lot, and someone who doesn't want to like kill anyone, but like will do any means to get what he wants. Yeah, and we obviously see like he will take extreme measures, like with the senator, because we saw what happened with that senator that they kidnapped, they turned him into a mutant, and like the end result was obviously he eventually died.
Right. Yeah. And of course, Magneto questions it when they're there inside the head of the Statue of Liberty when he says to Storm, "Are you really sure you saw what you saw?" And you're like, "She saw the guy turn to a puddle of water and then disintegrate. What do you think she saw, dude?"
Yeah.
And that's just like, okay, I know you're evil, or at least a little kind of belligerent, but come on, use your head, dude. So,
the way I could see that, he was a little bit narrow-minded in that point of view as well, because he thought it would be a success, but like I said, he didn't realize his machine kills until, like I said, Storm saw or told him that,
Mm-hmm. Essentially,
so he didn't really want to believe her,
Yeah. So, but I do want to address Daniel's comment here real quick. How do you guys feel about the portrayal of Rogue? Was she almost the audience POV or entryway into the world of Xmen? George, Price, your thoughts on this?
Anna Paquin, I think, did a very good job, and she was obviously the youngest or one of the youngest stars in this film. And for her to like take such a big role, like she did a very good job with it.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing like the entry point, because Rogue's a scared mutant at this point. Her powers are very dangerous. The boy that she kissed almost died. She doesn't feel like she feels like people are better off without her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this mutant that's rough and gruff that she feels comfortable with. And to me, the strong point of the X-Men trilogy in general has always been Wolverine and Rogue's friendship, his mentorship role towards her.
I would be like this, because Rogue was, like I said, she almost killed her own boyfriend. She feels like she just it's not worth being around people, because like no matter what she does, she's going to end up hurting somebody. She feels so, the whole thing about her, she always feels alone. She feels like she's in this world alone. And then she meets someone like Logan and the rest of the X-Men that she finds a way to make a family out of all of them, in a sense.
Yeah.
But just like going off of George's point, she really gravitated towards Logan because he was like like I said, not to compare apples and oranges, but he was kind of the Indiana Jones character. He was very rogue, very, he was always driven to his own motivations, but he was able to be a mentor of help to someone who, really needed it when she needed it.
Yeah.
Like I said, because like I said, he was the only one who actually went after her when she actually ran away from the school. Like Ambassador said that, Mystique tricked her into leaving, but it was Wolverine who followed her and convinced her to come back.
Yeah, even though she does get captured and he does get incapacitated by Magneto.
Well, I'm saying the initial part, he's the one who found her first.
Yeah,
because he knew where she was going. He knew that she wanted to run away, just like he did. So he had that kind of relevance to the situation, you would think.
Yeah, and I'll bring up Steven's comment here real quick. I get the idea of making her younger in place of someone like Kitty Pryde and Jubilee, and why you could tackle issues like that with a young character, but I always prefer cartoon Rogue. Yeah, and Steven, I do get that. I understand what you're saying and everything.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think eventually we will probably get a more accurate depiction of Rogue, but that'll probably be several years down the road.
Well, from my understanding of Future Past, wasn't that kind of the closest we got to an adult Rogue? The Days of Future Past?
Oh, the Rogue cut?
Yeah.
I've never actually watched it, to be honest with you. I only have seen the theatrical cut.
Yeah, I'm always speculating myself,
I've only seen like a clip from the Rogue cut.
Yeah, I think I've only seen like maybe one or two clips or anything. But I would definitely be interested to take a look at it somewhere down the road. So, but guys, I think we're gonna do final thoughts and then we're gonna wrap up, because it's getting a little late here, and honestly, I'm getting a little draggy. But I think we've had very good discussion, a lot of fun. I hope you all enjoyed it and everything.
It's good to be back. It's good to be back too. Yeah.
Price, good to have you back. George, same for you, buddy. I'm gonna let you fellas have have your final thoughts on this, and then we will call it an evening. So the floor is yours, guys.
The first X-Men. You can go first, Bryce.
I was just going to mention that, yeah, like I was introduced to X-Men like very young age, because I think it was 2000 when it came out. I was still in middle school, I think, that time, so it was kind of fresh in my mind by the cartoons and comics. But not watching the film, you can kind of distinguish what reality would look like between in contrast to the cartoon. So it's kind of an interesting little new way of looking at the X-Men from the cartoon versus the real live action. But it was a real well done film, because, like I said, I've always been drawn to like roguish anti-hero kind of characters like Logan and other characters like him. It just pulls me in real quickly how the story developed as it went through. So,
and I feel like with the first X-Men film, while it's not a perfect film, it's still a very good film. That the more I rewatch it, the more I appreciate it, because it's just focusing on telling an X-Men story.
Yep.
It's got a great cast that everyone understands their role, and even though maybe certain special effects may not hold up as well, others still do, and the fight scenes are still really cool to watch. And I feel like this is a film that like everyone who's a comic book fan, old and young, should watch at least once in their lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would just mention, like Ambassador says, the last thing I'll say is Ambassador mentioned that this movie is kind of a benchmark, not just for X-Men in general, but the entire MCU. Because when you watch the X-Men, it kind of shows you how well you can do a comic book film if you stick to the actual material and try, pay respect to all the characters and try to build them the best way you can for the hardcore audience, but also the newcomers or the newer kind of viewers. Like, okay, we have a real awesome story we can read about after that. It kind of pulls in more fans.
Yeah, totally. And I want to bring up these last two comments, and then I'll get my final words. Jacob, appreciate you stopping in tonight. And Jacob, I know we follow each other on Twitter. Send me a link to that video you did and everything, because I'd really like to see what you did with that drawing and everything. So, and also another good friend of the chat and everything, Fook Norris. Fook, it's good to see you, buddy. And good show. Loved X-Men comics through the 90s. Yeah, Fook, same here. As I mentioned earlier, me and Mam Ambassador will be going live Sunday afternoon to bring you all our thoughts, full spoiler review of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Nice.
I will be continuing this review series. The next installment will, of course, be X-Men X2.
My favorite, by the way.
United. It is by far one of my favorites as well. So, but I, of course, got a couple of videos I'm working on editing right now and everything. One's a theory video within the MCU, and the other one is a follow-up to a stream I did a couple of weeks ago with my friend Zach Leary and everything when we discussed Blade Runner 2049. So keep an eye out for those. I will let y'all know when those are uploaded on my social medias and everything. So, but all of that being said, folks, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Of course, if you catch us on the replay, leave your comments down below with anything we discussed or anything we might have potentially missed, and let us know what your thoughts are on X-Men 2000.
See ya, everybody.
Have a good night. Stay ambassadorial. And these are the ambassadors. Signing off.